You were part of the proceedings. You were called to testify. Very quickly, your involvement. There were 2 stages you were involved in this case.
So when the case initially broke, I was called in by the school governing body and the principal to write a report on what maintained the code of silence, because the disclosure came out accidentally via videotapes. And then at the end of the proceedings, I was called by the National Prosecuting Authority to give an opinion on the effect on the victims, the families and broader society, as well as the accused.
Okay, so looking at just, and this case, it was I think it made people angry, it made them anxious, it made, I suppose, there was fear, there were so many emotions involved in this one case. What do we take from this? What do we take from this experience, learning that he himself went through the same type of abuse at the hands of other pupils? What do we take from this, and just basically the safe places for our children that are not safe places anymore?
So I think that the first thing we take from it is, from the perspective of the sentence, it's a landmark judgment in terms of the fact that it's saying that even if you were abused, we are so far into awareness around abuse that it's no longer an excuse to abuse.
Okay.
So there's this perception that men who were abused become abusers, and if we constantly make judgments that use that as a mitigating circumstance, it's going to say, well, okay, if I was abused, I'm just an abuser in waiting, I'm not a victim. The second thing I think that it does a really good job in doing is showing that boys can be victims, because we are not very good at saying boys can be victims. You know, you got this backslapping boys' school bro code where they talk about women in very derogatory ways in the pubs, and, you know, women are conquests and objectified. But then on the other hand, when boys are subject to that, there's no language for boys to say that. And what this judge did extremely well was highlight that boys can be victims, and that victimness is deserving of a lot of punishment. And the final thing we need to take from it is that the language we need to give to young people so that we don't have another Rex is that if you are a victim, talk at the time. Because if you don't talk and you become the abuser, it will not be an excuse for the abuse.
Well, you also commented, or there are also comments about the schooling culture, this type of culture in these schools. I mean, for years we hear, yes, you know what happens at boarding school, you know what happens at places and in hostels and that kind of thing. What do we urgently need to look at? Because this is not the only school, it's not the first, it won't be the last where things like this happen.
That's 100% right. I think we need a national conversation about what we are trying to teach boys. This idea of men and masculinity and what it constitutes has become an enormously vexed problem, because while we empower women and have girls programs, we are getting to a position where men think that if we change society and gender norms, they are losing something. So they're kind of holding on to these old bastions of, you know, this kind of very patriarchal, misogynistic, kind of toxic masculinity, rather than saying we can engage together as genders to make us all safe. So I think we need a big national conversation about the education of our boys.
And speaking of these boys in particular, and Collan Rex himself, I mean, he's only 22.
Correct.
And these boys are teens, some of them very, very young teens. What do you see as their futures, both sides? Collan Rex, can he be rehabilitated? Can he come out as somebody who can come and say, this is what I did and it was wrong, you don't do it? And these boys, what do you see for them? Okay,
so I'll start with the boys. I think the fact that this judgment did what I said earlier, that it acknowledged their victimness and it gave them a sense of justice, actually vindicated them and said, my bravery and all the trauma I went through at the time, plus during the process and the secondary victimization, was actually worth it. And I've changed the world for the young male victim of sexual abuse in the country. And I see a good, bright future for these boys, because I think they truly are young heroes. You go from being victim to survivor to thriver to organizer. And I think they're organized in a big way to send the message. For Mr. Rex, one would hope that the Department of Corrections is seeing these cases in the serious light that they are now being seen by the judiciary in the judgment, and that they start getting programs in place to deal with sexual offenders in jail, because we know that there are real challenges around sexual offences and imprisonment, and it's not the greatest place to rehabilitate. However, you do need to have a sense of justice being seen as being done.
Yeah, because there were so many of them. Thanks very much, Luke.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for. Luke Lamprecht from Women and Men Against Child Abuse, just discussing this case with us. It came to an end, but what happens now?